Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the incoming Biden administration and the view from Iran. I'm very sorry for the delay. We had some technical issues, but hopefully we can make up for the time that we lost with a great discussion. I am Anise Bassiri-Tabrizi. I'm a senior research fellow at RUSI, and I lead our program on unpacking the Middle East. We already had a various number of events and commentaries looking at the impact of the US elections on the MENA. We know that overall the sense is that a Biden administration will continue the trend we have seen over the past few years of US disengagement from the Middle East region in the long run. But we also know that there are a few issues on which Biden is likely to focus very early on after taking office. And Iran is probably the one that it's going to be one of the main priorities in terms of foreign policy for the incoming Biden administration. The Biden administration strategy on Iran seems rather clear, has been outlined in an op-ed which has been published by the CNN already back in September. And we know that the Biden administration has, Biden in itself has criticized Donald Trump's policy on Iran, defining it as a dangerous failure, mainly because it isolated the United States. It led Iran to get much closer to a nuclear bomb and drove the Middle East region to be on the verge of a military escalation. Biden seems to be wanting to offer Tehran a credible path to diplomacy and have the US rejoin the nuclear deal, the so-called JCPOA, obviously provided that Iran also returns to compliance with the deal's obligation. He's also committed to address other issues of concern when it comes to Iran, ranging from the regional behavior to human rights. And the framework of this is still unclear, but will be the subject of discussion, of course. With all this in mind, it is really with great pleasure that I welcome three distinguished speakers to cover what the Iranian view is on all this. They have great knowledge on the Iranian foreign policy, and they have also great awareness of what a Biden administration might mean from an Iranian perspective. So I will shortly introduce them and welcome them. Dr. Seyed Dehghani Firoozabadi, he's the director of the Tehran Foundation for International Security Cooperation, and also a professor of international relations at Allameh University. Professor Nasser Hadian, he is a professor of political science and international relations at the University of Tehran. And Ambassador Soltanieh is the former Iranian ambassador to the IAEA with the second mandate taking place between 2006 and 2013. I'll start by asking a few questions to our speakers, and then I will open up to questions by all the attendees. But in the meantime, do start writing down your question in the Q&A box so I can make sure to see them and ask as many of them as I can in the short amount of time that we have. I also wanted to say that I'm really sorry that Hossein Mousavian unfortunately could not join us for personal reasons. And we wish him well, but we also hope to have him in future sessions. So without further ado, Dr. Firoozabadi, I would start from you. Obviously, we are talking about the perspective from Iran when it comes to the Biden administration, but we also know that Iran is a complex system. There is no one single view when it comes to many of these issues, but also when we are looking particularly to the Iranian view on the US and a potential Biden administration. So I guess if we can start from what do you think are the different strategic views in Iran on the Biden administration and the potential policy that this administration will take towards Iran? You need to unmute yourself.
Yes. You hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much for inviting me in prestigious webinar. And I say hello to my colleague Nasser Hadian. As you know, there is a different views in Iran about the United States and the nuclear issues. and it was intensified recently because of the election of Biden as the president-elect of the United States. And as you know, that the Iran-US ties is a multidimensional, multifactorial, and very complicated dossier. It contains at least 3 different but interrelated issues of Iran's nuclear deals, JCPOA, missiles program, and regional policy. And then it's very complicated, and the 3 very tense discussions is ongoing in Iran about the issue of the Iran-US ties. I can categorize these different views to certain category. The first one, I called it pessimist, realist viewpoints regarding the US-Iran relations and ties. The second one, I called it optimist.
Yeah, I think the sound of Dr. Dehghani is not working well. Yeah, sorry, Dr. Dehghani, the sound is not working quite as we wish. So our colleagues will try to fix that. Nasser, in the meantime, can I move to you? And then we'll come back to Dr. Dehghani as soon as that is fixed. And maybe could you, Dr. Dehghani, could you maybe switch just to audio and turn off the video, as that might help with the sound? Yeah. Do you want to have a go?
Okay. Okay, do you?
No, sorry, it's still not working.
Do you hear me?
Try again.
No.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I am not. I am mute. Do you hear me?
Now it's working. Yes, we do.
It is working.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I explained a little bit about these 3 views, strategic views in Iran: the pessimist, realists, optimists, and accommodationist, moderate, and pragmatists. I think personally that the dominant view is the pessimist, realist views in Iran, that it's according to these principles, based on these principles. Political realism, pessimism, and distrust toward international organizations, institutions, regimes, and international law. Distrust and doubt in the United States policy, suspicions of Biden intentions, and assuming the worst case scenarios toward Biden administration, cautious and step-by-step policy, and balance of power and balancing policy toward the United States, coercive diplomacy, restricted, bounded, occasional issue by issue in negotiations and bargainings, issue separation policy instead of issue linkage between the 3 issue of nuclear program and missiles program and the regional policy. Practical commitment for practical commitments, as you know, and balanced multidimensional and comprehensive foreign policy, the logic of consequentiality based on power, interest, and security. Advocates of this view make no essential distinction between Republican and Democratic parties based on the experience and historical record of US policy towards Iran. In their view, US foreign policy toward Iran is formulated by United States establishment, or the deep government, and different administration are only its executors. Therefore, they consider the general US strategy and policy toward Iran to be non-partisan. Or it is not depend on the party or the president for one of these 2 parties. The only difference between the 2 parties is in tactics and instruments. They argue that the US goal is to change the interest, behavior, structure, and ultimately the identity and existence of the Islamic Republic of Iran, meaning the regime change, regardless of Democrats and Republican presidents, then the overall US strategy is to contain Iran. Republicans like Bush and Trump see tactics and tools of threat, intimidation, and maximum pressure to contain, limit, and deprive Iran of elements of power. Democrats like Obama and Biden use the engagement tactic through persuasion and incentives to achieve these goals and advance that strategies. The general US policy toward Iran, according to realists, is a stick and carrot policy. Republicans stick or carrots, but Democrats prioritize carrots. In fact, these two tactics and tools are two sides of the same coin and complementary, according to them. As a result, realists are completely distrustful and suspicious of the Democratic parties and Biden. They believe that Democrats vote more subtle and more deceptive than Republicans. In a way, they use the iron fists in velvet gloves against Iran. According to them, Democrats also make optimal use of multilateralism mechanisms, organizations, institutions, and international regimes to contain Iran. Forming international and regional consensus as coalition with US regional allies in Europe and in the Middle East is another tool Biden will use to contain Iran. Then Biden will also use the legacy of maximum pressure strategy, US secondary unilateral sanctions to gain concessions from Iran in the JCPOA and extra JCPOA issue areas. Then based on redefinitions and US relations with its Arab allies and Israel, in the form of a new Middle Eastern policy, Biden will pursue a policy of containment and limitation of Iran's power in the nuclear, missiles, and regional spheres in order to maintain the balance of regional power. Therefore, Biden presidency and his foreign policy towards Iran is a challenge, not an opportunity. Realists argues that Iran should continue a foreign policy based on an all-out active resistance without appeasement in response to Biden's step-by-step policy. In their view, Iran's foreign policy toward Biden's three-step strategy should be based on 3 no's and 3 musts. There is 3 no's is no negotiation of JCPOA and its revision and modification, no negotiation about missiles capabilities, no negotiation about regional policy and influence, and 3 musts: unconditional return to JCPOA and compensation of Iran losses, unconditional fulfillment of all US commitments in 2015 JCPOA, suspicions and lifting of all economic sanctions in 22, then Iran will in return comply with its commitment in the JCPOA. I have time to continue to other 2?
No, if I may, I just wanted to ask you also a question about the Iranian point of view, because obviously you talk about how from some within Iran, there is no change in the US foreign policy, regardless if we are talking about Democrats or Republicans in government. The red lines are the same, the tactics are different. Some may argue that the same applies to Iranian decision makers. And while there is a lot of focus on the Iranian election, the presidential elections, which are taking place in June, the question that everybody is asking is, how will this affect the Iranian posture? Do you see continuity or do you see change?
Actually, I think the next Iranian president elections, I think, maybe I am wrong, that's the president would be close to mainstream in Iran and conservatives, maybe you call them, or principalists. Then in my personal opinion, I think there is an open door. I think it is more opportunities for negotiation about the U.S. Problem in Iranian foreign policy, because the system and the government, if I say the establishment in Iran, are most trustful to principalists regarding negotiation with the United States, and especially these three strategic issues as nuclear capability and missiles program and regional Iranian regional foreign policy. I think even the Biden administration will wait till the 2021 president elections in Iran. I think I am a little bit optimistic about the opportunities of the next government for negotiation.
Thank you, Dr. Dehghani. I'll come to you back during the Q&A, I'm sure. Nasser, I wonder if I can come to you and continue a little bit on this trend. As I mentioned before, it looks like Biden really wants to give a credible path to back to diplomacy when it comes to Iran. But again, like one of the questions that is asked is Iran interested in returning to the nuclear deal? Is it interested still in a barjam? And do you think it is ready to talk to a Biden administration? Can you unmute yourself, Nasser? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anissa, for giving me the opportunity to share my view with you and your audience. In fact, I would like to simplify the reality and to say that in Iran there are two groups, and in US also there are two groups in Biden administration. The two groups in Iran are the principalists who want to the extent possible, not all of them of course, but majority of them, who would like to delay the process until they believe they can assume the presidency of Iran. They think if the current condition continued, the rate of participation in the political process in Iran would be low, and as the rate of participation is low, they have a better chance of winning the election. Thus, they would like to see the current condition, which is not good, to be continued for another year. Thus, they are not in a hurry. And some argue that they would do their best to delay the process. The other group, which is mostly President Rouhani himself, and to a large extent his cabinet, including Foreign Minister Zarif, they all would like to see a quicker move. They would like to basically go back to the JCPOA, provided Americans would go back to the JCPOA and do the clean compliance, full compliance, speedy compliance, with good intention. Okay. Of course, they have some reservation. They would like to see somehow compensation to be paid, because we did not violate the JCPOA, and we did not violate the resolution 2231. It was the US who withdrew. And we suffered as a result, and there should be a cost associated with it. There should be a compensation. But we are realist enough to understand that's almost impossible in the US. Thus, I think European, particularly President Macron and the others and the Japanese, they can provide the compensation in the terms of credit line or investment, promises of investment, so forth and so on. And the point number two, which they have a reservation about, is a snapback. How can we be sure that the United States doesn't want to come back into JCPOA in order to use the snapback? How can we deal with that issue? I mean, just let's assume President Biden himself would not do it. But what about if the next president is going to be President Trump or Pompeo or some people like that? How can we be sure that they're not going to use that one? Thus, we have to come up with a mechanism to deal with that. There are a number of proposals in that regard who try to address that issue from, doing the full compliance by both of us without US necessarily going back to the JCPOA. Number two is going back to the JCPOA, but they should not have the right to use the snapback. Number three is just give us sort of assurances. We put the burden of proofs on the Americans to provide the sort of assurances that it's not going to be used again, unjustifiably because of the domestic politics, so forth and so on. And number four is what some Europeans have proposed is that we can use the majority rule, the majority of 4-3 or 4-2 for initiating the process of a snapback or a consensus rule. Everyone should agree for that to be applied. So that's from our side, but there are two sides in the American too. There are those who are they are being called pro-Hillary Clinton camp, which are more hawkish. And they say that, okay, why not using the leverages which have been created by the Trump administration? They have shown us a number of things that, the others are obeying these sanctions and Iran is under pressure. Why not wait a little bit longer? And then we are going to get a better deal. But the pro-Biden team, pro-Obama team, let's put it that way, they think no, we should act quickly within the first 100 days. With the number of executive orders, we have to get rid of a number of the sanctions, go back to the JCPOA, and then after 8, 10 months, a year, we can address other issues of concern for both of us. So realistically, I think what is doable is, because there is not a procedure for any country to leave the JCPOA, and there is not a procedure for them to come back. Thus, we need a UN resolution in order for United States to go back to the JCPOA. And it is not an issue just only between Iran and the US. Other players, including the Europeans, particularly the Russians, they have reservation to let America to go back. It is not a bilateral relationship or agreement between Iran and the US, rather the others are involved too. Thus, the Security Council should agree that the US to go back. And if there is a possibility, there should be a modification of this snapback, because others, as I mentioned, have reservation about it. So that's the best way. This is more practical, to let them to go back quickly within the first 100 days, and then address our issues and their issues, not only about the JCPOA and the content of the JCPOA, but rather about other issues of our concern, but US presence, for instance, in the US military presence in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Bahrain, in the region in general, in the Persian Gulf, we have a lot of concern why they should be there. And they have concerns about the regional, what they call regional behavior. So then, there are things which can be addressed relatively easily. We can come up with an arrangement with the US about how to leave or how to stay. And also we are ready to give our good offices to resolve the Yemen issue, and then Afghanistan and Iraq. Because in Afghanistan and in Yemen, it is far easier for us because it's not a part of our security complex. But Afghanistan and Iraq, our interests are not fundamentally different. And it's much easier to address them. So, but it should come later. That would be a big, big, big mistake to link the issue of the JCPOA to other conditions, to other situations, to other behavior, okay? Although personally, I've always argued for a comprehensive engagement with the US, but I think now it's impractical. All things considered, it's impractical, though I'm very much supportive of a comprehensive engagement. Because US policy toward us have been, since last 30 some years, it has been containment plus selective engagement. Our policy have been containment, counter-containment plus selective engagement, which has been wrong. To me, our policy should be counter-containment plus comprehensive engagement. But anyway, let's put that aside for now. And I think what is practical is basically to go back to the JCPOA quickly, because I'm not sure if it takes a year from now, those spoilers inside Iran and in the region and in the US are not going to destroy any chances of rapprochement. Because as soon as if it is a delay, I'm not under any illusion that Iran would begin 20% enrichment in Fordow. In fact, if we wait until President Biden is in office, it's surprising to me. Unless we receive a message, credible message from European or directly from the Americans, then wait. Iran is going to begin the 20% enrichment in Fordow and also creating other leverages in the region and in the missile program. So I don't want to see to go toward that direction. It's not going to serve anyone's interest. And the spoilers are going to use all of these things. So that's why it's better in Washington and in Tehran, we push for going back quickly to the JCPOA. Thank you.
Thanks, Nasser. And of course, there are many questions that I want to ask you based on what you just said. But one that comes to mind is this issue of, I would say, incentives that the US might provide that are perceived as such from an Iranian point of view. You touch on executive orders, the lifting of sanctions, and obviously we have seen in the past that these have been provided but have not been sufficient really to improve the foreign direct investment and engagement economically with Iran. So I guess my question with you is, what is a credible incentive that would suffice from an Iranian point of view to go back to compliance for compliance in a quick manner in the way that you described?
As I said, that a message should be received in Iran, because realistically in US now, there is no chance because of what happened between President Trump and Russia. So Democrats and President Biden's team are reluctant to send any message directly to be perceived in the US as intervening in the process of the current administration. Thus, it should be done predominantly by the European. Maybe in a track 2, people like Jack Straw, which has a good reputation in Iran, Carl Blight of Sweden, Mogherini, Solana. These are right now private individuals, and they have a good connection with both sides. So a message by them to Iran would be very important and very significant to convince that, okay, they are reliable sources, that, okay, that's what they're going to do. It's better for us to stop doing anything until President Biden is in power. Or a public statement by President Biden just right after these disputes are over. President Biden basically now is in a position of, or either President Trump has conceded, or it's basically in a position that, okay, he's talking from the presidential point of view. A talk in the foreign policy is sort of a message, public message, that he's going to go back to the JCPOA unconditionally, in a speedy way. These are the key word: clean, speedy way, quick way. That's good enough if he say it publicly. And in his inaugural speech, again emphasizing on the same points, would be well received in Iran.
Thank you, Nasser. Well, moving on the nuclear and the IAEA side, Ambassador Soltanieh, there are certainly a number of questions to ask you as well, but I would want to start from your experience within the IAEA and continue on the trend of what Dr. Dehghani was mentioning, but also what we know about the perception from the Iranian side towards the United States. And I wonder, the first question would be basically really, do you see any difference within the IAEA role from the Iranian side and the portfolio that Iran has to carry out within the organization when it comes to democratic presidency in the United States or a Republican one, or do you see continuity and no major shift from an Iranian point of view?
First of all, I'm going to, I appreciate the invitation. It's a pleasure to talk to you and to listen to distinguished friends that already talked. Second, I want to emphasize that I'm reflecting my personal views as a retired diplomat. Therefore, this is not the position of Iran. This is my personal views. Dealing with the issue that you raised and the question, I have to give some preliminary general comments, which is somehow related to. First, it is a good news that the Trump's government is disappearing. In fact, it is worrisome at the same time that the aggressive, unlawful war-mongering mindset and policy will sustain. This is unfortunately a bitter reality. 70 million votes that he got is a warning signal that, in fact, somehow the American people mindset is drastically changed 2 decades ago, and they are following the same mindset of Trump's, and therefore Trump's mentality or mindset might continue, and this is a serious threat to international norms, multilateralism, and international security. That's one very important point. And the other point is, in this intellectual gathering, we should not lose sight of the reality that normally Republican or anti-multilateralism and Democrat are somehow in favor. However, our bitter experience, Iranian bitter experience particularly shows that Democrats have spared no effort of instrumentally using multilateralism, international organizations for their own benefit and undermining the rule of law and international decisions, international norms. Of course, I have a number of examples that if time permits, I will explain to you. Then the other point that we have to bear in mind in this discussion is the Iranian people, having thousands of years of civilization, they are always opted for negotiation and talks and resolving the issues through dialogue. This is part of our genes. This is what Iranian people always are for. But at the same time, will never compromise on dignity and principles. That is in fact very important. And I want to remind that the supreme leader of Iran over 25 years ago, I always quote, he emphasized that our interaction with the whole part of the other part of the world and foreign policy should be based on 3 elements, which is dignity, based on the principles, and also, in fact, the wisdom, and the third one is, in fact, expediency. It means that we should not compromise on the principles. We should be very logical. At the same time, without jeopardizing the other 2, we can compromise. And JCPOA is one of the results of this mindset and diplomacy, which I can say JCPOA is, in fact, the triumph of the multilateral diplomacy, but also a fruitful result of this sort of foreign policy, which is the mindset of Islamic Republic of Iran, and this is it. Therefore, we are in fact, Iran have been always ready in a very decent, civilized manner to have a dialogue. This is another point. Second point, of course, is I've always said before, the key for Western countries to deal with the Iranian nation is to bear in mind that if you tell an Iranian you must do something, the answer is no with a loud voice. If you say, please do something, the answer is yes, I try my best. This is the key to many, in fact, the problems that we have had. And it seems that some policymakers in US and Europe still have not noticed this important point. Now, regarding your question about the IAEA, bear in mind, please, the fact that in the IAEA, of course, we do have discrimination. There are some member states party to NPT, some not party to NPT, and they have the same right and privilege in using the IAEA. Second point, in the IAEA, we have had a number of examples that US, either the Democrat or Republican, have instrumentally used the IAEA against developing countries, and particularly in Iran, in the case of nuclear matters. I just give one simple example, which is related to a nuclear file, which I was involved. In 2007, Mr. Al-Bradi, the former Director General, Mr. Solana, and Dr. Larijani, then the head of Secretary of Security Council, National Supreme Security Council of Iran, in fact, negotiated and talked to resolve all the issues and put an end to this file and allegations. And therefore, we had 2 rounds of negotiations, which I was involved. And finally, we had a modality which was endorsed by Board of Governors. It is in document IMSIP 711, 2007. I encourage all the distinguished listeners or viewers to just check the Google and read it out. This is a very important document. According to that, we are supposed to follow and do all the steps and commitments that we have committed to, and steps going on. And when Iran will fulfill its obligation, this file will be closed forever. Almost a year we have intensive work. We went and we got a certificate of resolution of all the matters which was discussed and the number of the issues. And for the last one was allegation mainly by US about so-called alleged studies. When we've dealt with this 100 hours discussion in Iran, in fact, and give all documents, and everything was satisfied, Mr. Hainonen, at that time, the Deputy Director General, came back to Vienna and promised before leaving to me and my colleagues that on Monday, he will give, in fact, the certificate of closure of those all issues, because everything was closed after intensive technical work with IAEA. When I came to Vienna and we met each other, he said, unfortunately, Americans have given a bunch of more documents and allegations. And therefore, the file was kept open, later on changed to PMD. And as you notice, what happened later on, I don't want to deal with. This means that the US has, in fact, influenced the IAEA, and Mr. Al-Bradi courageously criticized officially in the IAEA Board of Governors that when US does not, of course, they mentioned US at that time, that certain country do not permit the alleged documents to be delivered to Iran, how can Iran defend itself? And this was against any international norms and practice. There are a number of these issues that I don't want to deal with it, but I can want to conclude by saying that Iran was cooperating fully with the IAEA. And unfortunately, in different occasions, whenever the file was going to be closed by the allegation, it was kept open. The other issue is about JCPOA. Of course, as I said, the JCPOA is a triumph, in fact, multilateral diplomacy. We have to negotiate, and we had to negotiate, but I personally think that Iran has made too much compromise on JCPOA. Unprecedented, in fact, compromise in the whole history of IAEA. And as the reports of IAEA shows, in fact, unprecedented inspection in the whole history of IAEA has been made since JCPOA entered into force. And this is something that we have to bear in mind when we discuss what will happen from now on when Mr. Biden comes into office. We cannot ignore this fact that despite of this concession, unprecedented concession, we have not, and the people of Iran have not benefited, but also face the punitive action by the imposed sanctions and maximum pressure. Of course, I can give other comments and some examples. I don't want to be lengthy, but please give me a hard time and challenge me with other questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Soltanieh. I have one quick question, and then there is another one from the public that I will ask you. The one that I have is, obviously there is a lot of concern raising, especially in EU capitals, but also elsewhere, about the steps that Iran has been taking since May 2019 when it comes to the nuclear issue and basically the reversal of the compliance to the JCPOA. Iran has obviously stressed that after the US will lift sanctions, Iran will be able to reverse all its steps and go back to compliance. But I wonder, technically speaking, there is obviously, reports, especially coming from last week, about the fact that the IAEA has said that Iran has now 12 times the stockpiles of enriched uranium allowed under the JCPOA. And obviously, there are other steps in terms of R&D, research and development, but also advanced centrifuges. All of that has been happening over the past year and a half. Is reversibility really doable from an Iranian point of view?
Well, from a technical point of view and then Iranian point of view. The technical point of view, of course, some are and some are not. If Iran, which has, of course, followed its legitimate right under Article 36 of the JCPOA, have done so, decides to go backward, for example, sending the material out or changing the centrifuge machines, arrangement to lower enrichment and going back to 3.67 rather than now, which is up to 5%. These are all possible. Therefore, technically possible. Sometimes it takes depending on how we can arrange the machines and the cascades of the centrifuges. And of course, sending the material outside of the Iran, provided that this unjust sanctions, even preventing sending Iran uranium outside, which was part of the stupidity of the previous government of US, that they don't understand that it was in fact counterproductive to their own wish. Anyway, they just wanted to impose sanctions at any price without any logic, even if they destroyed and they damaged and had consequences for humanitarian consequences with the people. But anyway, the material could be sent out. Heavy water production could be, everything is, I think it's a matter of time. But the other issue is the R&D, research and development, of course. The achievement of research and development, you cannot go backward. This is what we've achieved. And of course, those who are going to deal with this and take into consideration, they have to cope themselves with the reality, technical reality on ground. We are now reaching from point A to point B, and this is where we are now. Well, if this is going to go backward, then we can, if Iran decides so, they can decide that we'll not continue that R&D, whatever it was based on provisions of the JCPOA. Now, what government will decide is hard for me to say, of course, because I'm not in an official position, but I'm sure that they have a lot of legitimate concerns, as we have heard in official statements. In fact, Mr. Hadian also gave a hint to that. The issue, and also Mr. Dehghani, that both distinguished colleagues refer to it, is a matter of compensation. We can just not start from where we stopped there in 2018. We have had a lot of damages to the people, suffering the people, and also our technology, nuclear cooperation under the JCPOA was supposed to be, cooperation was supposed to be realized, has not been realized. There are many damages, and it is not easily to go reversible. Iran will take back where it was, but the other party will not do it. Therefore, it is not that easy question. Therefore, I think this is left to the officials to discuss about this. But technically, as I said, this is what I can say at this short time, except the R&D, the other issues could be done. And as far as the IAEA is concerned, they could easily be called upon and in fact, visit and inspect the new arrangement in the enrichment facilities and check out. Of course, they do have also online surveillance, which was also another unprecedented commitment and concession by Iran.
Thank you, Ambassador. There are questions pouring, so I don't know where to start from. I ask one final one, and then maybe we can take this forward another time. But yeah, one question from the director of our proliferation department, Tom Plant, refers to the discussion about the potential departure of Iran from the NPT. And the question is, really, do you think Iranian decision makers are contemplating a withdrawal from the NPT? And would that mean, for instance, a joining of the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons instead, or on the side?
It is a very technical question, which relates to my 40 years of life. This is very important. First of all, we should not feel shy to say that NPT is the most discriminative treaty. Second, it was signed by during the Shah before revolution but we were so responsible nation that after that we tried to continue to be party to NPT, which this is should be great credit to Iran. While Trump administration came and called everything that Mr. Obama did as a disaster, but we didn't do it in NPT when the revolution succeeded. Therefore, we respected that decision to be party to NPT. And we are still working to NPT, and we are committed to NPT. But somehow we come to conclusion, and this has been discussed among intellectuals and some officials, enough is enough, because Iran is the only victim of NPT. If we were not party to NPT, like others, like Israelis, Pakistan, India, or others, we didn't have any resolution in Board of Governors or UN Security Council. We didn't have any sanction. And in the context of the IAEA, in fact, we had the same right and as a member of the IAEA. Therefore, this question is not irrelevant. Yes, there have been discussions that even in Parliament and even some officials giving hint that if the pressure is too much and we are not benefiting and suffering being member of the IAEA and party to NPT, then why not withdraw from NPT? The other issue, of course, was the additional protocol, which is the most intrusive, robust, in fact, instrument. Based on the JCPOA, we are voluntarily applying it. There are some discussions that perhaps we have to stop that implementation of the additional protocol. Regarding the other issue that you said, TPWM, in fact, NW, Treaty on Banning of Nuclear Weapon, I am following closely the discussion on this one and some comments by experts inside and outside of Iran. In fact, that was, of course, we have supported a negotiation. We voted for. We were among 122 countries which we voted for, but we have not signed it yet. I assume this is partly because we have a bad experience of NPT. Why another number of regional disarmament treaty? That's enough. But however, the message of course, this ban treaty is against nuclear weapon, which is in the line of our policy and our religious commitment being against nuclear weapon. Therefore, I'm not ruling out possibly that Iran will give some positive signal to that. Of course, some intellectuals and some colleagues were saying that, why don't we now withdraw from NPT and join the banning treaty to give indication that we are 100% against nuclear weapon, but we cannot accept continuity of this discriminatory treaty, so-called NPT, and suffered so much. But I think these are food for thought. Perhaps in the near future, we'll see, because in January, this ban treaty will enter into force. Therefore, I think this is something that should be considered, whether Iran will sign it or not. This is, of course, left to the officials and parliament.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I have a question for Dr. Dehghani along the lines of what we were discussing about what is and what is not in the interest of the conservatives. I think the question is from Kinse Gupta from The Independent in London. The question is, would it be in the political interest of the conservative not to have the US back in the JCPOA before the next year's presidential election? So I guess this is exactly the opposite of what Nasser was saying. Nasser was saying that it would be best to have a quick, clean return. But Dr. Dehghani, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were arguing that there is an opportunity for the next administration, which is more likely to be conservative, to instead have the US wait before entering the JCPOA. Over to you.
And okay, do you have my voice?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
You hear me? Would you please start my video? Is it possible?
I don't think so. I think it's better to go ahead without, because otherwise we don't have your sound.
Okay, I can try. Okay, then the voice. Okay.
No, we cannot hear you with the video. Yeah, if you can go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then I think the first step that the President Biden should take is to rebuild Iran's lost trust in the United States. Then Biden must, in the first instance, lift all sanctions after Trump's withdrawal from JCPOA in order to pave the way for further discussion within the P5+1 framework on how to fulfill the other JCPOA related commitments. Then I think, is it not true that at the present the government in Iran is reluctant to negotiate with the United States for return of the United States to commitment according to JCPOA? I agree with Nasser that the return to JCPOA is not the issue. The issue is the return of the Biden administration to the United States commitments according to JCPOA. Then the Biden administration, within 100 days, should show goodwill to Iran and take a practical step than making a good speech and I say that give the statement. I think it is not enough, and maybe during through diplomatic secret diplomatic negotiation through dealers and mediators, I think it is possible. But I think till the next presidential election in Iran, there will be no breakthrough in nuclear talks. Then if President Biden to take a big step forward, at least lift the sanctions has been imposed on Iran after the withdrawal of Trump administration from JCPOA, I think it is a good signal.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dehghani. We had your sound properly this time, so thank you for that. Nasser, I'll come to you last, as there are a number of questions on Iran's regional issues. I think one of the questions is about if Biden was to promote the rapprochement, which we have seen, the deals between Israel and the Gulf states, what would be the consequences for future Iran-US relations? And obviously, you know, we can talk hours about the Iranian point of view on the Abraham's deals, but I think the question here is the sense of encirclement, isolation from the Iranian side. Do you think it's going to continue under Biden administration? Do you think there is, I mean, obviously we have seen from under Trump, we have seen the attempt to create an anti-Iran coalition, not really successfully. And the only, I would say, success being these Abraham deals. So it's important to see how that could be portrayed from an Iranian perspective moving forward. How could that affect the Iran-US re-engagement, if at all, but also Iran-GCC countries' relations moving forward? Thank you, Nasser.
Thank you. First, regard to Iran-US relationship, I doubt, as I mentioned, it's an important factor, those normalization I'm talking about. In general, yes, Israel is very important. Israel is basically very influential inside the United States. It has a very strong lobby, it can impact, so forth and so on. But that put aside, the normalization, I doubt, first of all, Biden is going to pursue and to follow that policy, because as they have indicated, they think that, you know, Palestinian issue should be addressed directly and nothing can substitute that. Thus, I think President Biden is going to go back to the Palestinian. It's going to put the emphasis on a deal with the Palestinian, although they are not going to oppose the normalization, but they are not going to put a lot of resources in order to convince, persuade, force the other countries to normalize with the relationship, because their perspective is entirely different. And I think Palestinian issue should be addressed directly, and they are going to follow basically what President Obama did. But regarding the impact on us and how we are going to see it, you know, we are not happy about it, but we should not overestimate that. Because, for instance, we have a good relationship with Turkey. Turkey already has a good relation, or had a good relationship with Israel, so it was not an important factor in our relationship with Turkey. Yes, we don't like it, but are not liking the basic denormalization is mostly due to Palestinian cause. rather than our own self. You know, encircling Iran, if we think that they are going to come to Iran, if they are to our borders, or they're going to put basically military forces there or intelligence forces there, I don't want to say it is not a concern at all, but it's not all that concerns. We have enough resources. We have enough intelligence, security forces in all these countries. Okay, in UAE, in Bahrain, in Azerbaijan, to know exactly what's happening. They're very close to us. Thus, we have a good intelligence what's happening there. So it's not all that a big deal. Although publicly we are going to say those stuff, but in reality, strategically, we don't think that's a very important factor, because we have good intelligence, and if we perceive something seriously is happening, certainly we are going to act. How we are going to act, let's leave that away. But it's not going to be easy for many of these countries, and the messages have already been sent to these countries, and they know the costs. And I doubt. I mean, let's put it one sentence. We have enough deterrence for these countries that they don't engage in such a kind of activity with the Israelis. So our concern is mostly about the Palestinian, and the normalization we think is not going to serve, or is not going to be helpful to the Palestinian cause. So that's why we oppose them.
Okay. I have two fingers from both Soltanieh and Dr. Dehghani. We are behind schedule, so I will give you 1 minute each to conclude, so that everybody can then continue with their days. Ambassador Soltanieh, why don't you go? You're muted.
Just on the issue of the Israelis' normalization and this issue, in the context of my own work for years on Middle East free zone, I have to say that unfortunately, US, both again, Democrat and Republic, have in fact supported at any price, even on discrediting credibility of US and security of US in international arena, have supported against the wish of all. Just one historical example is the decision of 2010 review conference in NPT in New York, which I was involved fully. And there was a unanimous decision by Obama administration that there would be 2012, there would be a conference for the first time in the history on Middle East free zone. And US, despite of the responsibility as a conveyor with the UK and Russia, unilaterally postponed indefinitely this important conference. And it was, of course, facing the criticism by all allies, and everybody, in fact, criticized. And that was serious damage to credibility of US, that they were not following, and they were violating that commitment of that decision of the conference. But they didn't care, because they just wanted to fulfill the expectation of Israel. As long as this policy is there, totally ignoring the legitimate expectation of the countries in the region, then we would have a problem. We would have a problem, and doesn't matter is the Republican or Democrat, they will not be able to have the trustful relation with Iran or even other countries. This, in fact, normalization was not helpful and will not be really counterproductive to even the initiatives and works on Middle East free zone. The other issue I just forget, as an example, just within my 1 minute, is the issue of please refer to the Turkey, Brazil, Iran on the nuclear fuel, which Mr. Obama requested them to come as, in fact, intermediary and convince Iran to send the material out of Iran, and Iran just accepted. Unfortunately, immediately, because of pressure of Ms. Clinton at that time, the same administration passed the worst resolution of UN Security Council 1929. It means that how can we trust? Even the friends like Turkey and Brazil voted against in the UN Security Council. Therefore, this kind of gesture by both Democrat and Republic have to be part of the history. We should not be expecting wishful thinking that hopefully now we will totally have a new arena. The last point as a conclusion. Since the JCPOA was agreed and negotiated intensively by previous government, and Mr. Trump called it disaster, is there any guarantee that any sort of negotiation, of course, we shouldn't negotiate on the issue and talk about the missile, which is a red line, and there is no international treaty, in fact, on missiles. But anyway, if there is any negotiation with US by Iran or any other country, is there any guarantee that next administration will be committed to or will not call it a disaster? This is, I think, important message that I have to say at this juncture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Dehghani, the last word is yours, but again, 1 minute, please.
1 minute is almost nothing. I want to say a few words about the Trump maximum pressure policy toward Iran that has been failed and actually has been counterproductive, because it leads to adoption of policy of self-help and internal balancing by the Islamic Republic of Iran, adoption of policy of self-sufficiency in military power, strengthening its and developing its missiles capability, and also strengthening and expanding the regional influence in the Middle East, and give away the policy of confidence building and deterrent, because as is a failed policy, and strengthening the axis of resistance and its regional influence in the Middle East, and adoption of internal balancing instead of the multilateralism or cooperation with great powers. Then I think that President Biden should not repeat the same mistake that have been taken by President Trump. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Dehghani, and thank you all of you for your patience. I know that we cover a lot of ground, but if you look at the questions that remain to be addressed, we could do probably another panel right away. So I'll keep that in mind, and I'll organize something again soon. As you probably know, we launched this program recently, Unpacking the MENA. So if you sign up to the newsletter, you can keep posted on our activities, and there will definitely be more in the pipeline on Iran, given their interest, but also how relevant it's going to be for the US policy, for the European policy, and given also all that we are likely to see in terms of domestic developments. But for now, given that we are a few minutes late on schedule, I just want to thank our speakers for doing a wonderful job in addressing the question. I want to also thank the attendees for really asking very, very good questions, and for those that I didn't get through, I'm really sorry. I hope to manage next time to get your question addressed. I'll definitely keep those in mind when shaping the next webinar. But for now, I wish you all a lovely rest of your days or evenings, wherever you are. Please do stay safe, and hopefully see you again very soon. Thank you.